All righty, let's go.
Wow.
All right, and welcome everyone that's listening, everyone that's here. Thank you for joining us at Inspire Me Forward. My name is Linda Watson. I am from just outside of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and we are on a dozen. We are on 12, and we are in the first one of our 6-month Inspire anniversary. I don't know, I know that's not a word, but I'll be able to say it by the end of the the month. But it's just 6 months, and we've just passed our reaching the over 1,000 people mark, which is beautiful. Knowing that this community is just building and building and inspiring more and more, and it's exponentially grows and grows. So thank you all for listening. And I'd like to introduce our number 12 guest today, which is Lynn Carnes from the States. Lynn, I'm going to give you just a few moments just to introduce yourself.
All right. I am in the States. I'm in Western North Carolina. I live in Lake Lure, which is, most people have heard of Asheville. I am about 25 miles east of that, right on the edge of the mountains. And currently, the way my life looks is I have an official title. I call myself an executive coach. My unofficial title, I call myself a professional unleasher because my business is called Creative Spirits Unleashed. And we'll get into what that means and how I came to do that. I also have a podcast, which is called Creative Spirits Unleashed. And I've now written 4 books, which was going back in some of the things that you asked me to look at before this conversation, Linda, and looking at what led me to this and where I was when I first thought. I actually dared write down, I'm going to write a book. Didn't think I ever would, but I did. I've written 4 now. So I write books, and I also like to craft my days so that 80% of the time I get up and do what I want to do that day. So knowing that there's
Mm.
no way to have a life where you're not doing some things that you put in the category of drudgery, or work, but I want my work to be something that is fulfilling for me as well as for my clients. So I do that. And that means that a lot of my days involve water skiing, which is one of my passions, and riding horses is another huge passion. I'm not sure how I could live my life without either one of those things. And I also have a sculling boat. I occasionally fly airplanes. I have gotten into pickleball, evidently, with every other person on the planet. It's really addictive. And maybe I have that personality that likes to get into things like that, but I like to do something outside. And I have a new dog. I have a 10-month-old puppy, and we spend a lot of time together training her. And I know you're into dogs as well. So there's something about our animals that are amazing. So that's sort of a little bit of my official bio. And, some people have asked me, like, what is an executive coach and how do you coach executives? And it's sort of like, the same way you would coach anybody else, because in a way they are athletes, and they're just, the funny thing about a corporate athlete that's different than an athlete is that athletes have a lot of practice time and a little bit of performance time. Corporate executives have to perform all the time. There is no practice time. And in fact, practice time, if you were to call it practice time, is looked at as an incompetence. There's something wrong with you if you have to practice.
No.
And so what I have developed is a lot of ways to help people practice while performing,
Mhm.
because they still have to. I mean, we all have to have a practice, if you ask me. So that's a little bit about
Yeah,
me.
excellent. Thank you. Some really good points there, and I love that 80% of the time doing what I want to do. I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's one we can all take from. I love that. Love that. So yeah, every episode we've had, I sort of ask for something to come to me before, before, and I often am given just before, or I'll hear something on the radio, or I'll see something in a book, and it's like, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
And a few days before I think about it, and it's like I'm putting it out there, and it's like, no, wait, just wait. And I woke up this morning and the word was daring.
Ooh.
That was it, just came along with a few other things. I had to jump out of bed. I was going to sleep in this morning, but when the universe says, no, we're going to give you all these ideas when you wake up, and to remember them, you better get out of bed and write them down.
Yeah.
So I did, and awake early. But the word was daring. And I went to Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly, and I looked in that and talked about vulnerability. And I thought, well, no, that's not really where I thought. It's daring to step, to me, is daring to step into the unknown.
Yeah.
daring to make friends with the unknown
Yeah.
and embrace it as opposed to being fearful of it and reframing the unknown.
Yeah.
That's sort of where I've, as we've talked, and I've taken leaps of faith in my life, and it's like, oh no, I don't. Like my last big leap took me over a year to make, just to build up that daring and that courage. But since and doing after doing this, and I of all people are inspired, I think I'm the one that's inspired the most in having these conversations, is just being friends with that unknown and to
Yeah.
being like, okay, yeah, that might be exciting. Let's see what it brings, as opposed to, oh, I'm not sure what it's going to bring, and I'm a little afraid of what's going to bring. So being able to reframe that, I think the more we do it, the better we get at
Yeah.
that. So yeah, that's sort of what came to me this time, was that daring to step into that unknown with grace
Yeah.
and that. So I will leave that there in the ether for folks to take. And there is my
The
neighbors to now
blowers.
on the same time every week.
They're
That
just
we
not
can,
in on the Inspire Me Forward
I better,
timing, are
I know,
they?
I better hand them a card and say, listen to this and don't do
Yeah.
the lawn. And Lynn, I'm going to hand it over to you for a bit and let you share your story and your leaps.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually going to pick up on that word daring, because if you were ever to ask me when I was young if I was daring, I would say yes, but you wouldn't have seen me being daring. In other words, I fell more in the chicken category um, than in the daring category. Like, here's an example of how that would work for me. We had this thing called the Scout Hut on my elementary school playground. And a lot of the kids, they weren't supposed to do this, but they did, would shimmy up the pole and get on the roof. And then they'd shimmy back down, obviously, to get off the roof. Well, I had enough daring to get on the roof, but I didn't have enough daring to get off of it. So I'd get myself in these situations like that, where now I'm a little bit panicked. I know if I have to go ask for adult help, we're getting everybody in trouble because we're not supposed to be up there. And so there was all this collision of what have I done to myself when I took those kind of leaps, if you will. It's kind of the opposite of a leap because it was a climb up. But that was sort of the hallmark of my childhood, because of the way my parents raised me, which was sort of both be your own person, but you better follow our rules. And that's a direct contradiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had to live in a lot of different contradictions like that. And when I started to unwind it, and I mentioned this in the video that I sent you, was January 1, 1999, I started doing the book, The Artist Way. And you notice I didn't say I started reading the book, The Artist Way, right? Because you do the book. Now, I wanted to cheat and read the book and not do it, but it's full of exercises, and she does a really good job of drawing you in to actually do the things she's suggesting you do, like morning pages and so forth. And I actually stuck with it, writing things down and making discoveries and, spending some time in tears as I just discovered things like the incident from the playground and elementary school, those things that shaped me. And recognizing that the reason I'm this way today is because of some rule I made up back then. And the big one it frankly, it blows me away that this was such a big damn deal, but it's week 8. I actually went back to the book to find out when it was. And she asks you, she calls it the goal search. And she said, I'm going to actually read exactly what it says in the book, because you're going to go, this is no big deal, Lynn. How hard could that be? It simply says, name your dream. That's right. Write it down. In a perfect world, I would secretly love to be a fill in the blank. Well, I had been doing this thing at night where I would just fill it in and do the work. And that one just stopped me in my tracks. I don't know how many days it took before I was willing to actually write it down. And all I wrote down, and I actually found this too. I found the actual page from over 20 years ago. I said, I want to live at Lake Lure and work as an educational consultant. Now, how hard is that? Well, I finally wrote it down, and then I thought, that's the silliest thing I've ever written down, because we were living in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was a banker, and I was very much on the fast track to be an executive, a senior executive. I had like national responsibility. I was making a lot of money. They were throwing bonuses and stock options at me. People were like, you know, the CEO of Bank of America knew me, you know, so that must mean I'm a special person. You know, let's not talk about the approval junkie that does so well in that kind of environment. That's what was really why I was so good in banking, because I was an approval junkie and they just wanted me to fit in. But what's just wild to think is I wrote that down in, this would have been about March of 1999 when the 8th week came up in that program, early March, late February. In April, my husband, April of 1999, called me on a Friday night and said, hey, you want to go up to Lake Lure for the weekend? And I was like, I had been resisting even seeing Lake Lure, but I had written it down. So I said, well, sure, let's go up there. So we went and stayed at this little bed and breakfast that still exists all these years later. And we found the house that I am sitting in right now.
Oh, no.
And ended up putting an offer on it and owned it within a month. Now, I still wasn't planning on living in Lake Lure. This was our weekend lake house. There was no picture for working from home or how I would ever live at Lake Lure. But a lot of events conspired so that within 2 years, we started construction on the other house that I live in, which is next to this one, that I've lived in since early 2002. So the living in Lake Lure happened within 3 years.
Wow.
And April of 2001, in this very house, I got the phone call from my then boss that said, because I had jumped over to become an entrepreneur. I had become employee number 3 of a startup after working with a company that had 200,000 people. And he called me to say, we no longer have enough money to pay your salary. We would love to partner with you and occasionally have you come help us with clients, but we don't have enough client base to pay your salary. So would you consider going out on your own? And I was like, well, it kind of seems like I'm being kicked out of the nest, so I guess I'm going out on my own. And so April of 2001, I became not an educational consultant per se, but a leadership consultant. So think about that. In 3 years, my wildest dream that I couldn't write down actually happened.
Yeah.
And the leap of faith wasn't in the doing of anything else. It was in actually putting down on paper what I wanted. I couldn't dare want something for myself, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how that went down.
Yeah. Wow. So Lake Lure is where is that?
So Lake Lure is 25 miles east of Asheville in the mountains of Western North Carolina. We're famous for, this is where Dirty Dancing was filmed.
Oh, okay.
Also, The Last of the Mohicans was filmed right next to us in the mountains that overlook Lake Lure. Lots of other little lesser known movies have been here as well. But it's, you know, a lot of people look at it and call it Jurassic Park. It is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my life.
And that's what drew you there, is the scenery. What drew you to that place?
So, well, you know what? It was another thing that had to break down the barriers, because I was living such a small life, at least mentally, that all I could picture was if we moved to the lake, which my husband was a big lake guy. By this time we'd been married like 5 years. He was a big water skier. We had a ski boat that was, sometimes I thought he loved the ski boat more than me. That might be reversed now, but he loves to do projects with his hands. And I had been resisting the idea of having a lake house. We'd looked at lots of different places for one simple reason. I told him, I really like on the weekends to be able to sit and read a book, look out at the pretty things, float in the water, and you're always doing something. And I literally said to him, I don't want to have to hand tools to you for the rest of my life. And he said, what do you mean hand tools to me? And I said, well, when you're doing your projects, it's like I get all sucked in and everything. I don't care if you get sucked in. You don't have to hand me tools. And I realized that we had hit one of my core beliefs, that was when daddy's working, mama needs to work too.
Mm-hmm.
And that had been a staple of my childhood.
Yeah.
And I had never challenged it. In fact, I thought that was reality. So when I looked at Russ and said, wait a minute, you're telling me that I can be like laying in a hammock reading a book and you can be doing a project and you're not going to be mad at me for not helping you? And he goes, no, I love seeing you relax. And I said, well, let's get us a lake house.
Boom.
And so that, and it has been, for the most part, that's how it's been. That's his way of relaxing, because he's a computer programmer.
Yeah.
He likes to build things, doesn't like to run them. He just wants to build them.
Yeah.
And he doesn't need help. Every now and then he'll holler at me and say, can you hold this? Can you move that? But we're talking less than 10% of the time that
Yeah.
happens. And the rest of the time I'm, he drives by and waves while I go out to ski, or I'm hiking with the dog, or,
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
do. So
So it sounds like another, you had to name it.
I had to name it, and I had to see it for the lie that it was, which I think our belief systems can be that way.
Yeah.
Right. I think we are trained as children. We're given our rules for operating on this planet. It's almost like we're little aliens that show up, and everybody gives us the rules for, this is how you're going to get along here. And we don't even realize how personalized they are, because every family has their own set of rules.
Yeah.
And clearly my set of rules was, when daddy's working, mama has to work. In his family, it wasn't that. In his family, the rules were daddy can work and mama can play. And so there's thousands of rules like that. And I'd never even looked at them. And I think this is why I have so much respect for the work Julia Cameron did in the book, The Artist Way, is she has a really beautiful way of teasing out those rules and kind of getting the fingernail under the, under the thing, and letting you peel off the layers and see what's really true. And, I thought that my first year of The Artist Way, I'd had a lot of transformation. And I will say that I've had more transformation in the last 5 years than I did in the 2015 before that, because I just keep finding assumptions that I thought were true that aren't true.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And that willingness to see them, perhaps, whereas they'd be blindfolds on before, and I not wanting to see, or not even the awareness. Now there's that awareness and maybe looking for and going, there's another one. Unchecked.
Well, you know what? It's not just the willingness. There have been many of the beliefs that I've had to challenge that felt like I was being disloyal to those who raised and loved me.
Yeah.
Because they taught me this. They felt like they were teaching me the right thing.
Yeah.
And that it wasn't true for me. And so this is where I kind of get the idea of dancing the tightrope between what is right for me, without having to take away what was right for you, or what you felt like was the right thing to teach me.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the case of my mother or my father, or, and those were the sticky ones, not as much my peers.
Yeah.
Because we learn a lot from our peers and our teachers and so forth.
But
confronting things that your mother, especially in my case, my mother taught me, was very difficult, because I knew it was exactly the opposite of what she believed to be true, even though I could also see it was her programming as well.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Just breaking that pattern.
It's breaking that pattern, and it's and seeing it's part of it. But the other part is the, getting into those emotions that hold it in place. Once we're in the emotion, we can change it. But one of the things I was taught was, don't be emotional.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
I was completely taught that. I have, I do this assessment for some of my clients called the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument. And it gives you an assessment kind of what your thinking style preferences are. And looks at it from a right brain, left brain, but also from a limbic system neocortex, which is emotional versus executive function thinking. And when I did it for my family, we had 17 people in my family, do the assessment. And one of the things you do is list, what are the most important of some of the words. And I've done probably dozens of teams. I've never had any one team have one word show up 100% of the time. There's always, some people say logic, some people say emotions, and there's lots of other words, but those are the ones that come to mind quickly. 100% of my family had logic as the number one important word.
Oh, really?
So what is it? There was no emotion allowed in our family.
Yeah. 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 I think it was a generational.
It certainly was.
It was a generational thing. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Sort of that, that getting through the world, the Depression, World War II, like, we're going to suck it up. We're going to make it happen. We're going to have, and my granddad had his victory garden, this is how we're going to do things. And it's maybe suited those times, but it didn't suit me, and it didn't suit the times I was living in.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 We're evolving into a different time. Interesting. So you spoke of falling off the horse and getting back on.
Yeah.
Love to hear that story.
Oh my gosh. Well, so it's interesting because I discovered later a connection even back to the artist way, because one of the things you do is list 20 things that you used to love to do as a child.
Mhm.
And then the last time you did them as an adult. And number one on that list was riding horses.
Mhm.
But I had not been on horses for 40 years, except
Mm.
for maybe an occasional like vacation trail ride,
Yeah.
So, but I had made friends with a couple of people here who have horses. And the first time one of my friends who I talk about, I wrote a book about this called Dancing the Tightrope. She put me on her horse and she asked me to ask him to speed up just a little bit and trot. And he immediately started running. And we should have all seen that as the red flag that Lynn doesn't know how to ride. But we didn't, because I had actually only had riding lessons when I was 12 years old for like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I thought I knew everything there was to know about horses. That. So I was on a trail ride with my friend Babs, and on a very steady trail horse. She had us in the lead because he likes to be in the lead. There were 3 of us.
Mhm.
And I started noticing that whatever I thought I knew to do to steer him wasn't really working. And the proof in the pudding was when he walked me right through a spider web that was occupied. And I saw it coming. I couldn't, I was like, wait, how do you steer this guy? What am I supposed to do to not have that happen? So it kind of I took my whole face, spider web or spider and all. And as we were riding, I started feeling that maybe this is not so good to be on a horse that you can't steer. But again, he's very steady. And I didn't even know at that point about just the dangers of trail riding, right? Like I was still in the mindset, this is just trail riding. This isn't an arena show jumping horse like I see down at the equestrian center and so forth.
Sure.
We started going down a hill, and he's a Rocky Mountain, so he's got a different gait than most horses, and it's very lateral, especially going down hills.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I thought he was kind of doing something wrong. So I started trying to do whatever I knew how to do to slow him down. Yeah. And for me, that involved squeezing with my legs and leaning forward, which means he started running down the hill, which is never a good idea. And it took 2 bounces and I was off.
Mm.
And I tried to do the stunt woman roll. It turned into the stunt woman splat. I did have a helmet on. I know I hit my head because there was a slight bruise, but I also couldn't breathe right. And they asked if we should call an ambulance. And there's a part of me that wanted to be tough and not be emotional, but I said, I kind of think we need to call an ambulance. So actually she had to call, we were deep. This is a 2,100 acre property for horseback riding that had 50 miles of trails. So she had to luckily have a cell phone coverage to get her husband back with the 4-wheeler to come get me. Ambulance met us at their house. And I had done enough work on myself at that point to be relatively calm. Like in the ambulance, I was meditating and breathing and, not letting my monkey mind run. And I was feeling very good about myself. They put me in the ambulance, put me in the room in the hospital, gave me x-rays. And I thought I was going to be done. I knew I had a broken collarbone. There was no doubt. I didn't understand why I'd had so much trouble breathing, because I actually did I do a lot of emotional energy and clearing work now with my clients. And I did some emotional clearing work with myself out there in the woods. So what I didn't realize is I had partially reinflated my collapsed lung. They came running in after reading the x-rays, and these 2 doctors, their eyes are big, and they said, we need to get your clothes off. And I was like, what's going on? And I said, am I being admitted? They said, we have to put a chest tube in you. You have a collapsed lung. So I had to spend 3 days in the hospital, and I had just done the very best I'd ever done water skiing. I had finally, I'd achieved a goal I'd been after for 10 years.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking they're going to look at my chart and go, this is a 59-year-old woman. We don't need to get her back in shape because she's at the end of her life anyway. So I made sure all the doctors knew, treat me like a professional athlete, get me back on the water ski. Yeah. Now, bring me back on the horse, not so much.
Don't worry about that.
I saw no reason to be thinking. And what was really confirming to me was while I was in that emergency room, small hospital, all of the rooms were occupied by horse accidents.
Really?
All of them. Now we're down the road from Tryon International Equestrian Center. It's big,
Yeah.
but one of the others was something to do with a horse, a farm, and a gate. I don't know what, but it was definitely horse related. And my doctor, my orthopedist that came in to look at the broken collarbone was like, yeah, when I broke my collarbone falling off a horse. And I was like, okay, everybody, why didn't anybody tell me that this is like a death-defying activity? So I did not have any designs to get back on a horse. I thought, you know what, it's nice, but I'm not going to do it. And the friend that put me on the horse, the first friend, Daryl, she said, even if you never get back on a horse, you should meet my friend Bruce. He does leadership consulting with horses.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, okay, I should meet Bruce. And this was October of 2017. I got around to calling him March of 2018. I didn't exactly hurry things up. I was
high on your list.
Not high on my list. Now, this was also happened to be the year that the World Equestrian Games 2018 came to the Tryon Equestrian Center, which is 20 minutes down the road from me.
Yeah.
And one of my coaching clients was their marketing director at the time. I had lots of connections with what was going on there, but from a distance. So when I went to work with Bruce, I was looking at bringing a leadership team to work with him. And I was just there to see what he would do with a team, not what he would do with me.
Ah, gotcha. Yeah.
Lynn's rules strike again. You stay on the outside and you just do that with everybody else on the inside, kind of like, let's get Mikey to eat the life cereal from the old ad.
Yep.
And the day I took my daughter with me, who also happens to be an executive coach in a different domain than I am, and was working with me with this team. And we were pretty excited about having them come. And I had a pretty good experience, and I won't go into I tell a lot of these stories in my book, but I saw a glimpse of something that was very different than I'd ever seen with any other horse work I'd seen. I had seen a lot of horse work and hadn't been 100% convinced that I should bring a client to it, but I could see that he was doing something similar to what I did around rewiring the brain in the middle of an emotion.
Yep.
I was thinking, okay, this could be good. But we got in the car, and my daughter, we had a 3-hour drive home, and I'm like, this is going to be so fun. We're going to talk about all this cool stuff. And we hadn't even buckled our seatbelts, and she goes, we can never come back here again.
Oh.
And I thought, okay, I literally said, what did I miss? And then she went down the line of, he's mean, he applies too much pressure, he has broken glass. I saw broken glass, which she was just reaching at that point, But she was like, you cannot bring anybody else here. And so that thus ensued like another year of experimenting with Bruce, not even thinking about getting back on a horse.
Yeah.
But for the rest of that year, I would talk to him. I was trying to understand what he was doing. He was very repetitive. He was very annoying. But something kept telling me he was on to something that I needed to understand. Okay. And what finally ended up happening, you're not going to believe the horse I finally got back on. In the meantime, I had another friend with horses, somebody I'd known in my banking career, who had gotten into reining. And she and I talked right after the World Equestrian Games. The guy that she was working with in buying her reining horses had performed here for Brazil. And I said, I've got to come see you. So I went out to Oklahoma to see her at a big reining breeding barn. And they had heard my story. And the trainer that was working with her, his name's Trevor Dare, said, you should get back on a horse. He said, come on, I'll get you back up. And that was my first time to be back on a horse. And I had never been scared of being on a horse in my life, but I would not let him give me the reins. It was a reining stallion. I mean, it was a stud. Jeez. I know. See, horse people know. You tell that story to somebody that's not a horse person, like, yeah, right. Okay, great. It's a boy horse with balls. No, it's a stallion. but he did hold the reins. And I said, you know what? I cannot walk away from this. Yeah. So I started we had a local place here. It's called Cedar Creek Stables. They're a tourist barn where people go ride because we're kind of a tourist area. And I went over there all the time. For the next several months,
Nice.
I rode over there all the time just to feel being in the saddle. I didn't have to do anything. There was really nothing involved, right? Those horses were going to just follow like just nose to tail. And then I found a woman here to give me riding lessons. And Bruce kept trying to give me leadership lessons. And I kept going, I don't want you to get in my head. I just want to learn how to ride. And so one day I finally asked him, I said, do you give riding lessons? And he said, I do. And so I worked with both of these trainers, but one was working on my being with horses, giving me horsemanship, because the woman I worked with, her name's Lynn Brown, phenomenal horse trainer. And she taught me horsemanship. He taught me humanship, which he calls it natural humanship, because he began to show me how the way he calls it tyrant mindset, but how my past was interfering.
Of course, yeah.
What I was doing with the horses. And it's been a transformative journey.
I would say, yeah. So what happens now, I guess, when like where does that awareness sit? Like, say when you get on a horse now, as opposed to when you got on the horse, and go up into the mountains and the wilderness. Like,
oh my gosh, yeah. So
what's your process now?
So this is going to be so embarrassing to admit, but I, at the beginning, did really not see horses for who they were.
Yep.
I saw them kind of all the same. It's a horse. And the idea is get that saddle on and get on their back and go ride and do something fun. Right. Yeah. So when I finally began to start understanding that horses have feelings too, and they can actually hide their feelings, and that they can show feelings in very subtle ways, and that they have personalities and so forth. And what Bruce would say often, he has this amazing way of, he calls it being the conduit. He'd say, let the horse tell you what to do, when to do, how to do. And I'd be like looking at him like, how the hell's the horse? He's not talking to me. And yes, exactly. He began showing me how they were communicating. And what I began to recognize was that I could only be as connected to them as I was connected to myself.
Yeah.
So then I started finding ways to get connected to myself. And the way he did it was live and in the moment. And what I thought of as, and what my daughter really responded to negatively about applying pressure, what I discovered, and this is really interesting, is when the pressure was higher than my ability to handle that pressure, I would feel emotion.
Of course. Yeah.
He would then say, use your mental tools, like listening, hearing, patience, timing, problem solving.
Yeah.
Really pay attention to that horse, as opposed to do what you've always done, which is your rules. And what I discovered is every time I would actually be able to reach for my tools under pressure, instead of reaching for my rules, which was my old way of doing things, something shifted in me. I could feel my brain rewiring. Absolutely. And then I started skiing better. The ski pro that runs a ski school here started noticing the dramatic difference as I would bobble on the ski and not have to stop skiing. Because I used to get adrenaline hits that were debilitating.
Really?
When I was riding horses over at Cedar Creek, like the second time, we're in the mountains, so we're riding hills. There was no way for me to ride horses that it doesn't involve repeating my accident going down a hill on a horse.
Yeah.
Linda, the first time I had to go down a hill on a horse, they were telling us how to sit and, balance yourself on the horse and all this kind of stuff. My heart was pounding. You would have thought I had jumped out of an airplane with no parachute. I had that much adrenaline.
Yeah.
And as I would go through these incremental changes in the round pen with Bruce, as he would apply pressure on me, asking me to do something with the horse that I couldn't do. And that little, I've come to think of it, it's like the door to the room of the old pattern opens.
Yeah.
Okay? And so now what he kept saying is, you're beating yourself up, which is the equivalent of, okay, the door is now finally open. I can go change something. I'm finally in the room. The pressure opened to the door. But what I'm doing is going in the room and trashing it. And it's already trashed. Why am I making it worse? So he would tell me how with that door to open the door to that room and then actually do something different than you've always done.
Yeah.
Go put some order back in place.
Clean the room. Yeah.
Clean the room while you're in there.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
so that's been what getting back on the horse has really done for me, is it's completely raised my pressure threshold to the point now where used to I'd show up at Bruce's place, and I still go work with him at least once a month. And he would say, "What do you want to do?" And I'd be, "Well, I hope I get on a horse today," because he didn't put me on a horse probably for 8 to 10 lessons. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't do that anymore. He'll say, "What do you want to do?" And I'll go, "I don't know, more pressure. Let's just find my edge.
Keep push me. Yeah. Yeah.
Find my edge."
Love it. Find my edge. Love that.
So that getting, if you think about getting back on the horse, it's a literal and a figurative thing. Because it has, that thinking has permeated everything I do.
Yeah.
Because along with the idea of letting it tell you what to do, when to do, how to do, it is break it down into its smallest steps.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found about myself, and I think we condition ourselves a lot with this, is I was very goal oriented. Horse world, get that saddle on, get on the horse, as opposed to first just figure out which horse you're riding today. Second, get the halter, one step at a time. But I also would do that. Like, one of the places I found myself this is going to sound so weird, but so goal oriented, is like, I'm hauling a lot of things back and forth between the camp we own and our house. And I would just want to get everything all at once and just, pile everything in my arms and rush in with it, like kind of dripping out of my arms as I'm trying to just get everything in the house.
Yeah.
And I've started applying it just to getting things out of the car. I kind of take a look. It's like, okay, first put this on your shoulder, then put this in your hand, and it's a little bit like chop wood, carry water. There's really no difference in what you're doing, but the mindset with which I'm doing it has changed. And horses have given me that.
Sure. Almost sounds more mindful.
Much more mindful. And I have learned as I've approached horses now, since my little accident, I kept a list of all the horses that I've ridden. It's over 60.
Yep.
And so that means I've gotten to meet a lot of horses.
Yeah.
And I wish I had been keeping a diary of how they respond to me 5 years ago versus now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because what Bruce always said to me is, if you are in that mindful state, they know it.
Of course. Absolutely. Yeah.
They absolutely know it. And so whenever I get on a horse now, or first, I never just get on a horse. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah.
We get to know each other very quickly, and I can really kind of tell, are we connected or not? And I just don't make it a practice to get on a horse that I'm not connected to, or even aspire to get on a horse that I can't. Yeah. And they're individuals. I'm now taking an animal communication class with Anna 20, who happens to live down the road to me. She is a world-class animal communicator and has trained over 10,000 horses, has gentled thousands of Mustangs.
Sure. Yeah.
She knows horses like nobody's business. And she actually was a guest on my podcast and has shown me how much of an individual they are. And she goes, horses can be assholes too. They're not all perfect. They can be not suited for the kind of work we've asked them to do. And really, that's what she means, is that they're not, it's not that we're anthropomorphizing them, but that she's like, you would not want to just take any horse and ask them to go be a therapy horse any more than you would take any human and ask them to go be a therapist.
Well, and does that not, when you say that, I go back, my mind goes back to the check boxes that we've been put in life, and those rules, and that seems like, well, no, they're individuals. And what rule is good for you? And you spoke of that and growing up, and what rule worked best for me, or what was good for me. Sounds like the same thing there, is like we're applying that to another being now.
Yes. And you can see how they, like, I'll give you an example of one that's really different. Bruce took on a very dangerous feral horse for a friend of his to train back in the fall. And this horse couldn't be touched, and was actually considered, like, they were advised to, and not Bruce, but the other people, to put him down immediately because he was that dangerous.
Yeah.
Well, as Bruce began to work with him, he discovered he was untouched, but yet still aware of, as he calls, people's world. And this horse has the most childlike wonder you've ever seen.
Mhm.
His energy is so different than his initial reputation. And it's sort of like, it's almost like he's saying, oh, so this is what you people do. So you put this rope on my face and then I just follow you. Okay. You can lead him with a feather light touch. And the first time Bruce put a saddle on him, the horse was like, interesting. Okay, well, I guess that's what you people do. And when he trained him to get in the trailer the right way, not forced on, it's sort of like, oh, how interesting. I mean, the horse is just sort of like has this childlike wonder about him, which means he's suited for very different work than a horse that would have, been gentled enough to be not too dangerous to ride.
It sounds like what's coming for me is like a person that's a highly sensitive person. Now you've got a very highly sensitive horse, and if teaching us that you can learn from a horse that's highly sensitive how to work with people or work with yourself if you're highly sensitive. And there was a horse that was just saying that I'm highly sensitive, like treat me that way.
Right. That's exactly right. And that idea of being sensitive has been something I've had to reclaim for myself.
Yeah.
Because I was raised in an environment, this like sort of logical, be tough environment that meant that I think I shut down a lot of my sensitivities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm still, what this has done for me is I feel like I'm just a babe in the woods in reclaiming my own sensitivities. And I'm so grateful for horses like Willie, the horse I just described, because he's helping me see how to be even gentler and more sensitive with myself than I had been before.
Totally. Oh, I can so resonate because our youngest dog is that way. She's very sensitive, very, very sensitive. And to try to tame that sensitivity would just crush her. Like it's, we're allowing her to be herself. And you are sensitive, and that's okay if you don't like that person or don't want to be near that person, because you can feel their energy.
This is exactly right. And that's been the other thing Bruce began to show me was when I was feeling something inside, it didn't always mean there was something wrong. He taught me about this like idea, he calls it a spirit level or a negative positive pole, but he says, you are also picking up the energy of the horse.
100%.
And so if you don't understand what your own energy feels like, then you don't understand how yours is different than his. And you'll begin to misread situations and over and underreact because you haven't tuned into your own energy so that you can then tune into others' energy.
Exactly.
And so a lot of our work is on getting very concrete with reading my own inner energy and understanding then the energy of another sensitive being that I'm in the presence of.
Exactly. And that fact, I was working with a group the other day and we were talking about personal space. And when walking to an animal or another human being, it's two personal spaces that are meeting.
That's
it's
right.
Not my personal I'm walking into yours. You're also like, they meet together. And it's that energy that's connecting and being aware of that, both sides.
And what I love that you said is honoring that they have the right to take care of their own energy. Right? Like I no longer just walk up and pet the face of a horse that I've met.
Yeah.
I never do that now.
No, great.
I let them tell me when to come in or whether or not to come in. And sometimes they invite me in and sometimes they don't invite me in.
Yeah.
But I stay in a way that lets them have the right. And I've done the same thing with my 10-month-old dog and training her is I've begun to try to train, and training isn't even the right word, but to work with her in a way that helps her make good choices and to let her know what choices she can't make. She's a Doberman. She cannot go jump on people. She'd like to. We're working on that right now.
Yeah.
Because she wants to be up in your face. She's not the typical Doberman. She's very, very sweet, but she generally makes really, really good decisions.
But 10 months old, yeah. They're teenagers.
Months. Yes. But I'm working with her to let her live with the consequences of her actions as well.
Sure.
So for example, when we're playing Frisbee, she knows to give me the Frisbee. And if she doesn't want to give me the Frisbee, guess what? I'm not throwing it.
We're not playing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. That's
Yep.
fine. That's your choice. Live with it.
Yeah. 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 There's a pattern to this, and this happens, and then this
Yeah.
happens.
And then this
Exactly.
happens. This is how this works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a question that kind of has been it's sitting with me as you're talking here, and you said earlier that you have done some flying.
Yeah.
How is flying a plane like being with a horse?
That's such a good question. I actually discovered it. I discovered it in a very unusual way. My flying instructor, mostly was letting me start with the flying myself. And when you're in an airplane, you're constantly balancing right and left, up and down. Okay. So you're holding heading and you're holding altitude. So
Okay.
it's a constant correction. The greener you are as a pilot, the more you're kind of correcting. But I didn't really recognize that. But the analogy I have is, I'm sure you've seen when somebody is having trouble with a horse and a really good horseman gets on the horse, and the horse is one way with person A
Yeah.
and another way with person B. Well, you can go, well, okay, that horse has a brain and he knows this guy knows what he's doing and they've connected and all of that. So that's a brain to brain, connection there. Well, one day the flight instructor, who's a 24-year-old young woman, she's a marvelous young woman. I was doing something and we were out and it was bumpy and I was kind of uncomfortable with all the bumps and the corrections and trying to keep my altitude and all that stuff. And she goes, "I've got the plane." And the plane immediately settled down. And I thought, okay, wait, that's just like the horse that settles down when a good rider gets on. The pilot, what had happened was the corrections that she was making were more nuanced.
Okay.
So instead of the plane moving far to the left and then correct to the right, and far to the right and then correct to the left, or far down and up and down, she was able to sense those corrections sooner and make them sooner.
Okay.
And so it's almost like she and the plane were one. And it was, part of it was, I think she was, the other thing that I think is very much the same is when I'm flying, there are moments that door opens and that the pressure is right in that, I call it the froth. It's like my discomfort zone where I'm still online. My brain is still online, but I'm uncomfortable enough that I would really like to resolve this. I'm making a landing and there's a crosswind, or I'm having to follow a jet and make sure that I don't have the turbulence doesn't turn my plane upside down. The ATC gives us a last minute instruction to circle in the pattern instead of finish landing, whatever that might be.
Sure.
And so in those kind of moments, the other thing that happens is asking, instead of my normal way, which was very common before meeting Bruce and working this way, was like, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. I'm, going for my rules. I now am just sort of like, okay, what's next? Break it down step by step. They just said left circles. All right. Left rudder, left aileron, find your point, start your circle. Right. And then what happens in those moments is I start raising my pressure threshold again. So what I loved about flying, and they were asking me why I'm doing this, and I said, it's strictly to work on myself under pressure. To be a good pilot when things aren't going right. So, and
well, that's exactly working with an animal.
It's exactly right. And one day she, we were flying to an airport in Georgia, and she said, we're going to declare a practice emergency. We'll find the nearest airport. We've had an engine problem. Get us to the airport. And then we got over the airport. She declared to the people in the airport that did not have a tower, we are doing a practice engine out. And one of the planes that was in the area said, it was another instructor, said, we'll wait out here till you finish. She pulled my power and said, you've got to put the plane down. You can't touch the power. This is what makes good pilots, right?
Yes, exactly.
And I got the plane down. And what was cool was I didn't ever have an oh crap moment. I had okay, well, what's next? If that's the case, where do I need to get this plane so that I can set up for a good landing without power?
Yeah.
Every time I took a step, then I just asked what's next, and then took another step and asked what's next. And instead of like focusing just on the end goal. That was what was leading me, but it wasn't the thing that was driving me. What was driving me was what's next.
Interesting. So leading with the end goal, but leading and driving. Those two components, yeah.
Kind of different. And it's like having a picture for a horse. Like I knew what the picture was, but then I had to break it down into the frames of that picture.
Yeah.
So that's how I work with horses as well. As that's the other beautiful skill that I've really appreciated getting working with horses is if you have an impeccable picture, chances are they'll pick it up. And you won't have to do much of anything.
Oh, exactly. So knowing all of that, I'm being a little cognizant of our time here, but we'll keep going. Knowing all of what we've talked about, and you were in the situation with the horse going down the hill, now, what would you do? What would be different?
I have done. So interestingly enough, with Mocha, I have ridden him probably 100 times since that accident.
Oh, okay.
It took a while to get back on him. The accident happened September of 2017. My first ride on him after that was October of 2020. But in fact, I rode him day before yesterday. And what is more interesting is about 2 months ago, I was riding him. It was the exact same 3 people on not the exact same trail because it's 50 miles of trails, but we encountered a cow. The cow was 100 yards away on a different property, but Mocha doesn't evidently like cows. It might as well have been a grizzly bear. Yeah. And Mocha was pretty damn sure that this thing was coming after us. So I all of a sudden had, instead of the most steady state horse ever, I had a horse under me that was 1,200 pounds of let's get the hell home.
Sure.
And because of all the tools I had and all the skills, I was able to ride him a different route to not put him right in the nose of the cow, but not take him straight back to the barn, but ride him with that much up energy. We considered even, should we try to dismount, because he had the other horses upset, but he would not settle. No amount of bending, no amount of palming. Sure. So we walked home. He would love to have galloped. We walked all the way home. With him in the middle. We actually switched horses out because if he was in the lead, he needed a horse in front of him to take him away from the responsibility of having the cows behind him and whatever might be in front of him. So we were in the middle. And again, no understanding of why he was so concerned, but we got him home safely, all of us. And I was almost, I don't like to think of it as a test, but it was a reflection of how far I had come. And I often wonder, was I upsetting him about the cow? But later Babs came back and said, he didn't even want to go out the next day. There's something about the cow. And she said, you probably couldn't have calmed him any more than you did,
Sure. Yeah. It's in flight mode.
He was just gone and I couldn't get him back. And there was no way it would not have been safe to get off. There was no way to get off that day.
Sure. So you made an emergency landing back at home, but you did it safely.
We did a safe emergency landing back at home. And, kind of all looked, and I've actually, in that time, when you say going back down the hill, I had a friend's trail horse just start bucking one day. And all I had done was ask for a little hindquarter yield, barely touched his side. Later learned there was a reason I shouldn't have done that. She didn't know he was sore there. Yeah. But I stayed on that day. And again, all I had was that picture was stand still. And he kept trying to he was kind of like corn hopping a little buck, whatever. But he was trying to get into an area where I really didn't want to come off because it was like under a shed and so forth. So I kind of was guiding him for a good 15 seconds and all the people around, their eyes were really big. And when we settled, I was like, okay, what just happened? Why is he doing that? And she later discovered, but I was able to not freak out there. So
yeah, wow.
I won't tell you I'm ready for the 8-minute bull ride or anything. And I'm not getting on any horse that I think is going to buck, but I think all of this stuff together, skiing, flying, riding horses, has helped me raise my pressure threshold so that I can at least stay present at a certain level of pressure,
Sure.
much higher than it was before.
And does that create sort of a more, like in life in general, does that create a more, just a softer life for you, like or a more balanced, happier?
It's interesting. Yes, more, I would call it more balanced and like more willing to go with the flow,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and just do things that used to bother me. Like we were just in the British Virgin Islands and I used to get really, really motion sick on a boat.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of boat riding. So what I realized is I think I'm just going to have to ride the boat the same way I would a horse. So don't resist the movement, but just let the boat move you.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get motion sick at all.
Really?
And I've been getting motion sick since I was a little kid. So, and we had dozens of boat rides. I'm not saying I was loving them, but it wasn't because I was sick, you know, it's just,
Green in the gills and hurling over the edge or anything.
no, I wasn't doing any of that. It was just, it's sort of more like, can we not go find a place a little closer to have fun? Like, do we have to go 40 minutes over there? What do they have that these guys don't have?
Exactly.
But I wasn't sick, and that's what was really cool. So I
Wow.
think it's made me more willing to do things I wouldn't have done before.
Interesting.
So back to your word of daring. I mean, maybe it's made me a little bit more what I would call daring, even though most people would go, yeah, Lynn, it's riding a boat. It's not that hard.
It doesn't, yeah, I think that's all, it goes back to that sensitivity and that, you know, each horse being its own personality, and we all have our own sensitivities and we all have our own poles that we climb and don't want to come down. And as soon as you said that, I was taken back as a child to climbing, you know, stairs that don't have backs on them.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
that terrified me. And I remember, as soon as you said that, I remember a cottage once going up to see my sister, my older sister, my cousin at the top of a boathouse. They were sleeping up there, and I climbed up the steps with no backs. I was so proud of myself. Damned if I couldn't get down.
Yep.
I had to have my mom come and get me down and coax me down. So as soon as you said, I'm like, oh yeah, I know that.
And those are life defining moments.
They are. Oh, a few years ago, for sure.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't matter which direction it is, up or down. It's still that moment of uncertainty and unknown and daring to try it. So
That's exactly right.
Interesting.
That's right.
You've had quite the evolution, the personal evolution. I thank you for taking.
It's been a lot of evolution, and I'm grateful for it because I don't know where I'd be or who I'd be if I hadn't been willing to start learning. Because I really wasn't willing to learn before. You know, all I really wanted to do was prove myself. I didn't need, in fact, I felt like if I had to learn something, that just proved that I was weak and there was something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the line, and I don't know exactly when it shifted, that I could actually truly say, no, I've become a learner.
Versus proving. That's a big one. Yeah.
Yeah. Proving versus improving mindset, you know?
Yeah. So if we could take all of that wisdom and funnel that into like three good nuggets of wisdom, what might those be?
Well, I would start by the idea of pressure and recognizing it is the catalyst to growth. And it also is something that can crush us. And the difference is just how we choose to see it. Like once I'm in the room under pressure, am I going to trash the room or am I going to clean the room?
Yeah. No.
So how I choose to see it, and can I be kind to myself and use it as an opportunity? That's number one. I would also say we can't help what happens to us. For example, we can't help the pressures that get on us. Life in the modern world has a lot of pressure, but I do think we can choose what to do next. And so that's where I think we become the co-writer of our life, right? It's a little bit like having a co-writer of a script. And if we can just keep remembering the next thing hadn't happened yet. So make your choice.
I like that. Yeah.
I think it's very important to recognize that we have more choice usually than we recognize that we do. And then,
I like that.
I mean, the final thing is, I would say, truly get to know your inner self, because that's where, if you're not connected to your true inner self, you can't connect to others. Like you're connecting through the holes in your wall. We all have walls.
Yeah.
We all have, our rules are a form of self-protected walls, but it's the holes in that that true connection happens with horses and other humans. Nobody connects with a wall.
Mm,
So we
true.
gotta let we've got to connect to ourselves and let there be more holes in our walls so that we can connect deeper.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So if you had a call to action for those that are listening, something that we can take forward in the next short while, and just what would that sort of call to action be? One action.
Yeah, my shorthand, and then I'll add a texture to it. My
Okay.
shorthand is, instead of reaching for your rules, reach for your tools. But
Ah,
here's what I mean by that is, see if you can actually really listen to the situation and see if it will tell you what to do, when to do,
mm,
how to do.
sure.
So in other words, pay attention to, like, I'll give you a live example. I drive a boat every day for a water skier, where I'm driving between a row of two buoys. So I only have a couple of inches on either side of those buoys to drive the boat straight.
Sure.
I can either think I know how to get into that path, or I can let it tell me how to get in that path.
Mm,
And when I give myself over to it, my hands automatically turn the steering wheel in the right place at the right time.
mm,
And it's the same with driving a car. If I say, okay, the car and the road will tell me when to turn. If that's where I'm turning, we
yeah.
quickly learn not to jump our wheels over over the curb. So just changing that little mindset that says, I'm going to reach for my tools, which then let me craft this moment,
Yeah.
as opposed to following someone else's rules for how this moment should be.
Exactly.
That's what I
Yeah.
mean. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Oh no, that's brilliant, and it's almost like feeling it.
You are feeling. That's
Yeah.
one of your tools. And I talked about the wall. Our rules and our walls are very good for us. They are very self-protective. We don't
Sure.
just take them down and try to go out in the world. It's like trying to be a turtle without your shell. Like that you need to replace it with something. And our inner being can be strengthened, and our ability to call on our own resources that were given to us at birth
Hmm,
can be
hmm.
strengthened by these practices. And then
Absolutely.
you don't need your wall, because this is much better. Your light is a whole lot better than a wall.
Yes.
Let it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And somebody said to me once, and it was in a group, and they're like, it's like growing edges. Like
Yeah.
we need that. There's people that have lived a life without a safety, a comfort zone. We need that comfort zone. That's where we rest. That's where we rejuvenate.
And
So jumping out of that is not for everyone, but growing those edges. And I think you mentioned that before, is pushing that pressure and pushing those edges
yes.
is a much different way to see it, and a new way to reframe that, as opposed to skydiving out of that comfort zone that only adrenaline junkies are going to do.
Well, and they're hooked on it in a way that's maybe even harmful at some point.
Hmm, hmm.
There's a way to get too hooked on that stuff. So where's that healthy balance? This is back to dancing the tightrope. Not
Exactly.
becoming an adrenaline junkie, but using pressure instead to help you grow into who you were born to be.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Because I think that's really what I mean by creative spirits unleashed is, we owe it to the world to shine the light that only we can shine.
Oh,
And
exactly. Yeah.
so how can we unleash that spirit in a way that makes us feel safe?
Yep, yep.
You
And
know,
imagine in the
also daring, safe but daring at the same time.
daring, yes, safe,
There's
safe
that
and
dancing the
daring.
tightrope again. There's so many
Yeah,
tightropes we.
exactly, exactly. And if we all have, if everybody were to shine their light just a little bit brighter, imagine what the world would like, how bright the world
Yeah.
could
Can
be.
you
So
imagine? Well, if we
yeah,
could just own that the light we have is unique,
yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
here for a reason, and you'll never know how you've made a difference. I feel like so
Oh,
much of the difference we make is really in the smallest things. Those small interactions can make as much of a difference as the big ones.
and you never know. You just, I learned that lesson years ago when somebody sent me a note thanking me 15 years after we have did something.
Yeah.
And just at that moment in time, I'm like, I never know. And when I stand in front of a classroom or a workshop and leave, and that used to be that feeling of, oh, I didn't make, I had no impact. And at that moment, I was like, I'll never know. And that's okay. Just show up with my light, show up with myself, and be true to that. The rest will fall into place. Just like this conversation, we don't know where it will go to. And for those listening, it's what piece do they take out for them?
That's exactly right. This is one of the things I've learned about writing books is I don't get to choose what people take from my books.
Yes.
When they come back and tell me what they're taking, I'm like, you got that? But it's because I don't know what they've lived.
Exactly. And I'm just about to release another one, and it's exactly that. You don't know. Once you push submit or however you publish it, it's released. And that light is there. Yeah, exactly.
There's nothing you can do.
Yeah. You just listen and go on to the next one. So wow.
Yeah.
We could talk for hours. I love talking to you.
Boy, does time go fast when I'm talking to you, Linda.
I was telling our listeners, Lynn and I had a pre-conversation, and it could have just gone on for hours. I think we were both like, "Oh, I have something else to do."
Yeah, exactly.
So, I so appreciate your wisdom, your sharing of everything, and those steps and that you're learning, and for writing down. And I thank you for writing down for us, writing down. Daring to write down that your dreams.
That one thing.
One thing that just, and it grew from there. So thank you for being here today, and thank you for spending this time with us. This will all be up online within a day or so. We will get this up as quick as possible, and then people can watch it from there. And this month we're moving on to one every week. So we will have another one next week. And we're having Pat Hutchison join us. And she's going to talk about nudges into spirituality. And it'll be another great conversation, I'm sure, because her and I spoke for another hour and a half, 2 hours the other day at all. So it's going to be, again, it's something completely different, yet those through lines are so often similar. And thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being here. And as I always close, and this one just seems more fitting, in the words of my late father, inspiration is a door to which we see the future. May we ever keep it open. And may we clean the room or do whatever we need to do in that room and put those holes in the walls and move on. So thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Linda.
And thank you all for being here. And that is all.